Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stay Strong in America podcast. I am your host, Tyron Brown, here for another episode of our Mindful Mondays. And so for our new listeners, I know you may be wondering what that even means. Well, this is our episode segment where we focus on physical, mental, emotional health, and well-being. So if you happen to be driving, I want you to keep your eyes on the road, but your ears wide open. And if you happen to be in a stationary place like a coffee shop, your friend's house, or even better yet, your own place, feel free to take out a notepad and jot down some notes, because today's episode is definitely going to be one for the books. So stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stay Strong in America podcast. I am your host, Tyron Brown, here for another episode of our Mindful Mondays. And I'm excited about this episode today because it is actually a continuation of a previous episode I did called What I Really Needed, addressing childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations. Now, in my previous episode, I discussed with you guys where trauma stems from, what trauma actually means, and how our childhood actually has a major impact on us. And if we don't address it, or try to come up with solutions to address it, or even acknowledge it, then it impacts us in our adulthood. And so in our previous episode, I gave a few examples from my life where I felt there were issues that occurred in my childhood, and how that impacted me later on. I discussed very important topics such as emotional, verbal, physical, and other abusive things that people experience in their household growing up. I discussed aspects of parents and their caregiving or their lack thereof that can impact us emotionally and mentally and physiologically, and particularly gaslighting when it comes to parents and how them disregarding our emotions actually causes for us to even be confused about the trauma we've endured. I've discussed our social environment and particularly being in a school setting and how that has an impact on how we develop or don't develop self-esteem over time, and how it impacts us in terms of relationships later on, because that's where we form our first relationships. I discussed traumatic events, especially sudden ones such as death, and also the aspect of parentification, which is being forced to mature sooner than our peers or sooner than what we should be expected to at our age, which is actually, it could appear relative, but I think there's normative aspects of when a child should develop and grow and what they should be held responsible for. I also provided a few indicators that were helpful, not just for me, but can be helpful for you in terms of childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations. Some of them included emotional regulation or lack thereof, rather, and having intense emotions and being hypersensitive. The lack of us having boundaries and therefore not respecting other boundaries. Us having a harsh inner critic, meaning we have a lot of shame and guilt that forces us to have a perfectionist approach to many things in life, which causes it to be a burden for ourselves. I also talked about something that's very important and that should be noted, which is self-validation struggles and being unsure of oneself because of the lack of consistency and reassurance we received in our childhood. I talked about setting ultimatums, seeing things are very black and white. All people are this way if they do that. All people are another way if they do that. Those exaggerations, they stem from childhood trauma. And also the need to perform, feeling you have to prove. Instead of just being, you have to do something to have value. And then also something that was very interesting I learned about childhood trauma I discussed, which is limerence, and having a fantasy when it comes to romantic relationships and getting lost in it as a way of probably escaping emotions and also being codependent on our romantic partners to deal with whatever unfulfillment we've had from the relationship we have with our caregivers and other important authority figures in our lives. So I want to recap that for you guys because, as you can hear, there's a lot of different aspects that come with childhood traumas and a lot of indicators and a lot of things that you should be aware of that you probably aren't. So if you have the opportunity, please take a look at that episode and just really listen in on it. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things you can walk away from the episode with. But today, I want to get into the solutions, right? We have problems. We have awareness of those issues, and we've accepted that those are issues that we want to fix. So how do we fix them? So I want you to get your pen and pads ready because there's a few things I want you to really tap into so that you could be able to manage these the emotions that come with childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations. And even if it's not you experiencing it, it can be others that you know and love and care about who might be experiencing these things, and you want to be able to have some solutions for them. So, guys, just stay tuned because we're gonna get into this today, and I'm excited for what I have to share. All right, so let's get into it. What are some solutions for childhood trials, trauma, trials, and tribulations? So, I was on YouTube quite a bit, right? Now, I've been in therapy before, and I think that therapy is something that's very important. Um, but there's also the research I've done on my own, and so I listen to other therapists as well too, because I feel like other perspectives help, and obviously, like the more data you gather, the more you can trust feedback or suggestions for anything, especially if it's for our own mental health and well-being. So just like, when you look at a restaurant and you want to see how good it is, you rather look at a restaurant that you rather trust the reviews you rather trust a restaurant with 1,000 reviews as opposed to 10, all right? Because those 10 could be people who work at that restaurant who trying to make it sound good so they can have income coming in. But those 1,000 reviews, I mean, unless somebody has all the time in the world, you can trust that. And they can have a mixture of good and bad. And after a while, you start seeing things that are consistent so that you can make a solid judgment as to whether or not you want to go to that restaurant. Well, that's how I feel about solutions when it comes to anything related to, mental, physical, or emotional health and well-being. And so I looked up childhood trauma, and I looked at very notable people who had, quite a bit of a following, and also people were very involved in the comment section, and they talked about their experiences with solutions for these issues they've been having. And let me tell you, I was able to find some consistent suggestions, right, and recommendations. So the first thing that I want to say, though, is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to child trauma, and the list that I will be providing you does not fix your issues overnight, guys. Like, I'm just going to be very realistic about that. But over time, these suggestions are said to be helpful for many individuals, including myself, especially if you are dedicated to the process of your overall healing, right? So the first resource is journaling/reflection/inner child work, which requires you to slow down and process everything. That's so important because, I know for me, there was a lot of emotions I was having that I didn't know where they were coming from. And I'm like, okay, this is a lot. And I know journaling sounds like something you probably see in, cartoons when you were younger or kid TV shows, but they're very realistic. It's not just for entertainment. It's something that we all should do. And I noticed that when I was doing like a lot of reflection, maybe after a workout where my mind was reset, maybe after a good night's sleep, which doesn't happen quite often for me. And I know that probably has to do with things that are on my mind. But like whenever I had that time to really reflect, I noticed that there was a lot of things that were stemming from issues in the past that I thought were addressed, but they weren't. They were still on my mind. And I was still bothered by it. I could almost put myself back in that emotion when I thought about it. And that's when I knew I need to do some inner child work. And I didn't give it myself the grace of really addressing the issues that I've been through, and not to say, Tyron, I've been through the worst, but there's a lot that you go through that you normalize over time. As I mentioned in my previous episode, you could have, just because, like, in the area that I grew up in, there were a lot of people who probably went through what I went through in, single parent household, having to walk to school that was a couple miles away, not having enough income in the house, and a parent that had to take care of multiple children, and also not having enough income or education to, change things the way that they wanted to. It's a very stressful situation, and everyone around you was in that stressful situation, and that's why we normalize it, and that shouldn't be the case. Just because everybody's getting, pushed down the steps doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, right? But you see it happening quite often enough, you begin to not be bothered by it. And I never forget when Toni Morrison said in in an interview, God rest her soul, she talked about certain injustices she witnessed growing up. And she said to the interviewer, I never want to become somebody that didn't react when I saw horror going on in my environment. Now, yeah, I'm paraphrasing her and probably misquoting a bit, but you'll get the message of what I'm trying to share with you. She basically was saying that she doesn't want to see injustices occurring, especially if, you've seen someone getting physically harmed, as in the case with her, growing up in a very, very discriminatory environment, and then not be bothered by it, because that means that you've normalized it at that point. And that's what I want you to understand. When you keep normalizing things, it actually doesn't go away. You're probably stuffing it down deeper and deeper and deeper. And then one day it blows up. So if you feel the pain now, or you feel the emotions now, you can deal with it and process what's going on. And a lot of times as children, we didn't understand what was going on. We just had the emotion that came with it. We knew we were bothered. We knew we were upset, And I think I remember even going into my adulthood, like when I was getting ready to go to college, and I remember, I'll never forget that day. I didn't have a way of getting up there. And I remember, I don't know, just for some reason, I never was somebody that was like, oh, I need my father, I need my dad, this, that, and the other. I always knew my mother was my caretaker, but I just never forgot how everybody was like, they were going to college, and even if their dad didn't live with them or wasn't involved in life for 10 plus years, it doesn't matter. They were like, oh yeah, my dad's going to bring me up. My dad's going to bring me up. My dad's going to pack my stuff. My dad, my dad, my dad, my dad. And I remember in my household, it's my father who was the one who knew how to drive. It was my father who, he probably would take these long trips. And I realized at that moment, just like, man, you don't have to be involved with any part of my life. But if you were just there for that, that would have been super helpful. And I remember me having to pay other people, asking my roommate for, that first year I was moving up to college, and offering to pay his dad. But they're like, no, we'll do it for free. But it was just the pride that was hit at that point because I couldn't rely on someone. And that feeling had gotten to me. And I never forget, it was that same disappointing feeling when I was younger, I remember my mom was like, oh, your father's going to give you money for school clothes. And it never happened. It never happened. I remember it being sixth grade. And if, you know how middle school is, when they'll tease you if your jeans are too tight, at least at that time, fitted clothes is a thing now, particularly in the cities. But back then it was baggy clothes and the freshest sneakers and, kind of like what many children actually go through. But I remember just like it never happened. And much credit to my mom for trying to fill that gap. But it was the same thing all over again. And I just remember like the impact. I was just frustrated at that point because I didn't have the resources when I was trying to do something productive. It's one thing to have wanted school clothes, right, to fit in, but it's another thing to want to go to an institution to get a higher education so you can have a better life and not having the adequate resources to get it done. And that is just that frustration that's building up. And when you don't address it, it weighs on you. It takes a toll on you. And that's just one example that that I'm given from my childhood, but there's plenty others, like even when I think about some of my first relationships that I've had and the way I even relate to women sometimes. I remember some of the first relationships I had, even going back as early as middle school, and I didn't even hold on to it too bad. It was like, I remember someone saying, oh, this person is dating you only because she feels sorry for you. And the reason why I share that is that a lot of us, we don't share these moments, right? And just, you would think that doesn't bother you, but years later, you kind of almost take on that, right? Like, somebody's with me because they only feel for me. It's not because it's genuine. And you bring that insecurity and you roll it over relationship after relationship after relationship to the point you're in your adulthood and you've grown, you're much more attractive than at least you perceive yourself to be, and you're in great physical shape. And I'm speaking about how I started to notice these things about myself, but it was like I would have to constantly tell myself these things to realize, oh, I'm here. It's like you finally arrive someplace and you don't even recognize it. Like, I crossed the border into Mexico and I'm on vacation and I didn't realize it. I'm still stuck in New Jersey, and it's like that. That's because, your self-esteem sometimes is stuck in those moments. And it took me a while with that to understand that, and that definitely affected me in relationships I've been with that preceded that feedback that I got from others when I was in middle school, and it was kind of like I didn't even acknowledge the fact that like sometimes people are just harsh. They try to break you down as much as they can, and the bullying's harsh during those times. And so, but when it comes to your self validation and your self esteem, sometimes it's stuck in those places, and that's why people years later, people I've dated, like oh, I bet you've had a lot of dating options, this, that, and the other, and yeah, that can be the case, but it's like me not realizing my growth and how great and attractive of a person I find myself to be. It took a while. And so I asked you to do the inner child work and reflection and journaling because you want to be able to convey this message to yourself so you understand what you went through and you can process it. And the more you process it, you can be able to understand yourself a lot more. And more importantly, understand the root cause. And when I started to see the root cause, I was like, oh, shoot, this is just a matter of changing my mind. But I wouldn't know that had I not done the reflection and the inner child work to see what was bothering me. Why is my relationship so volatile? Why did I need so much validation in my romantic relationships? You know, me not setting boundaries or me always worrying about somebody's opinion of me. I thought it was just like when it came to like, um, my mom particularly, because that's who I grew up with. Sometimes, like, she ruled a forceful hand at times, as any Caribbean parent does, or many immigrant parents do for that matter. And it was like I couldn't express myself the way that I wanted to. So I just kept my opinions to myself. That happened a lot of times with other people. And, I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to say no because I was just like, you do what you're told. And a lot of us don't admit to that, right? We just, I'm being a good person. We trying to make up stories in our head, but really it's because you never learned how to say no. And then people don't even know that certain things were bothering you until it blows up at the end and you have a whole list for them. And they're like, why didn't you tell me this instantly? But it's like, you can't say, well, I had childhood trauma that, and experiences that caused me to stuff my opinions deep down. Nobody's going to want to hear that from you as a grown person. And that's unfortunate, but it's also fair too, right? We're adults at this point. But that's what happens, right? Time doesn't mean anything. We could be 35 years old. I'm 30 years old, right? And I'm just realizing some of these things. So there's a couple of books that are recommended that can help you process this. I got this from a few licensed therapists online. One is John Bradshaw's Homecoming, which I will be purchasing, along with John Pollard's Inner Child, right? So John Bradshaw has a book called Homecoming, and John Pollard has a book called Inner Child. And I suggest to do this because prior to seeking external feedback about your childhood experiences, whether it be from a therapist or somebody, licensed or close to you or your loved one, it's better to understand them for yourself first. Believe it or not, you know you more than anyone else. And I think a lot of us don't even realize that. In other words, your truth matters and it's critical to validating and addressing what you experienced during your childhood that caused you to have childhood trauma. Nobody's going to understand that better than you. So look at journaling, reflection, and inner child work as a way for you to get to know yourself or for you to acknowledge yourself, to say the least, so that you can know how to move thereafter. All right. The next solution I like to recommend is therapy and counseling. That's a legitimate source, guys. And that's why I said do the inner child work and then go to the therapist. It does not work for everyone, right? Especially talk therapy, but starting out with a professional evaluation from one or several therapists, psychiatrists, or psychologists can help, as they have been trained to do the job of dissecting and addressing any mental health or emotional struggles you have endured and providing solutions tailored to who? You, right? That person gets paid to care and invest in you. And, that is not to say that they are perfect, but talk therapy provides, or should at least provide, a safe outlet for you to begin your journey of uncovering and addressing your childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations. But keep in mind that you have autonomy to pick and choose a mental health professional that fits you. So don't feel obligated to settle with the first option available to you. You know, um, it's going to take some time. And when I actually found a therapist through when I was working at a job I had in the past, it was a customer that put me on to a therapist. And it was a black male therapist, and it was the best thing that could have happened for me. And I reached out back to him recently, trying to get that ball rolling again, because he was the one who was actually, he understood me on a certain level. It was like he was knowing where my mind was going, and he gave me grace to speak and, you know, ask inquisitive questions, which I appreciate. You know, somebody sometimes poking in and being nosy as they should be when I have concerns that I don't know how to express. So, but that wasn't the case with the therapist I had before. And, you know, there was a couple of ones I had and it just wasn't working for me. But when I had him, it was just like, wow, he gets me. So it was like he was the third try. So that's 3 times the charm when it comes with me. But you might have to try 10 times. And if talk therapy isn't for you, it's not. But I would say give it a chance, please, because sometimes, you know, yes, we could start the self work, but there's someone else to guide us along the way and make sure we're protected in that journey. You know, we have help, take advantage of that help. You know, and people often say that finding a therapist that fits you is kind of like dating, where you gauge your comfort with someone. You know, so look at it like that too. You know, gauge how you feel with this person, and if the relationship feels fine, and nobody's perfect, but if it feels good and you feel like you could trust this person, and you feel yourself opening up, take advantage of that. You know, while talk therapy may not always be a comfortable process, you know yourself enough to know if the therapist is someone you're willing to open up and to share confidential information. And if you get to that point, see where it goes. Because sometimes that's the first time we're really tapping into, you know, what's going on. I mean, my therapist was the first one to say to me, Tyron, you have to know yourself. And I took it seriously when he said those words. So try that out and see what that does for you. The next solution is called, well, actually, before we get into the next solution, I just want to say one more thing about therapy. Guys, I know there's stigma around it, and people might clown you for it. They might make you seem crazy, and people might be dissuaded to hang out with you because of that. But if somebody doesn't understand the importance of therapy, especially if they know you've been through a lot in your childhood, especially if they're a close friend, then, you know, maybe you want to question your relationship with that person, because I don't find that to be a bad thing, right? People wonder how sometimes how come people get to, you know, demonstrate violence later on, you know, and have issues. But a lot of times that stems from the fact that people haven't done the work, and that's why therapy helps. So just keep that in mind, all right? So those are 2 solutions that I have for you. And I will continue with a few more from my sister, who actually will be joining me. She's a licensed therapist and social worker, and she has a few tips she'd like to share with you guys. So hang on just a minute, and we'll bring her in so we can hear some feedback from her. So everybody, I would like to introduce my sister, Kerry, to the Stay Strong in America podcast. Kerry, why don't you give them a full introduction of yourself, actually?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kerry Green, also, well, Holmes now. I just got married last year. Still working on changing the last name. But I am a licensed master social worker. My expertise are in severely mentally ill individuals. And then I've also had work with crisis intervention work on the ACT mobile crisis team in the Bronx. And right now I'm serving the homeless and helping them transition into the community with new housing. So that is pretty much, you know, my experience and the field and the work that I've done. I graduated from University of Albany, SUNY, with my bachelor's, and then I went to Hunter Silberman School of Social Work for my master's. So yeah, that's basically me.
Gotcha. And just to give you some perspective, guys, she's only 1 year older than me. She's also a twin. She's a twin brother. So we're not far off in age. And so the thing I love about this is the fact that it's not the fact that she's just, you know, related to me, but it's that you have somebody who's also young and aware of this topic I'm discussing today. So as you know, Kerry, we're discussing childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations. And one thing we talked about in our previous episode was the fact that this is something that can affect you in your adulthood. And I began discussing certain solutions to address that. The first one I discussed was journaling, reflection, and inner child work. And the next one I actually discussed was having a therapist or a counselor to discuss what you've been through. Can you tell me the importance of, well, the relevance first of childhood trauma and why you think is very helpful in a very unbiased way, as much as you can, to have a therapist or someone to talk to about your issues from childhood?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was doing therapy for about a year. Most of my work was with the geriatric population. And I do feel that a lot of the things actually stem down to, once you get start peeling the layers of like the onion, you start getting down to the root. And a lot of it had to do with a lot of childhood trauma that then affected someone's the way they were in their marriage or their parenting styles, and that would have ended up impairing the relationship with their adult children. So there's a trickle down effect with that. Myself as a therapist, like I said, I've been married for a year. And for the first time, I was like, I need a therapist because there's some work that, I needed to do. And not saying that everything has to boil down to childhood trauma, but we get a lot of our experience in life from things that we witness. So it could be with parents, it could be within our community and things like that, within our friends, within our school. And we take all of those lessons and those experience and we kind of bring it out into adulthood, and we kind of just keep going on and adapting to those patterns. And some of those patterns can be negative, where they can start impacting your relationships with family. It can impact your relationships in your job. It can also impact your relationships with your significant other. So these are just things to be aware about. And it's not saying that, having a therapist is seen as something negative. I think now with people being more vocal about mental health, it's actually being seen like as a good thing that people are, especially within the Black community, checking in on their mental health and getting a therapist and just finding, healthier coping skills so that you can just be a better person overall. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be, because being a therapist, I feel like a lot of people think that, okay, once you're in therapy, you're fixed. Like, that's not how it works. The work depends on you and how far you're willing to go to put that work in. And just like everything, there's going to be setbacks. So it can be an ongoing thing. Like you've done therapy for a year or so, but then there may be something that later on triggers you in your life where you need to come back again and have, I call it like a reset. So it's a good thing to talk about this, like I said, and kind of address some of those issues. So those unhealthy patterns and behaviors you can try to address day by day.
Gotcha. And thank you for sharing that. That's so important. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Having a therapist, it doesn't necessarily fix you. And that's the mistake that I made in the past where I thought I'm in therapy, I'm good to go. And then those setbacks occurred when I had that mentality, right? And I
Mhm.
realized there's a lot of self-work that occurs in that process. So I mentioned journaling, and if you just go over it really quickly, is it journaling something that you find to be very effective? Because I know for me, my journal, actually I do it on my phone.
Mhm.
And because I'm always on the go, and I was just like, okay, if a thought comes to me, I don't want to forget it. And so I write it in my phone, and I've been able to find a lot of root causes as to certain emotions that I have from even middle school. So tell me, is journaling a tactic that you use, and how helpful have you found it to be?
Well, I think journaling is very helpful. Like I said, I work with a lot of like the geriatric population. So
Which is, I'm sorry, before you continue, geriatric, can you explain that
So
for our
those are like the
audience?
older adults.
Hmm.
So sometimes like, bringing up different techniques in therapy, sometimes certain people are stuck in their ways. So you kind of have to learn how to adapt. And even with this population, like the millennials and stuff, I think people think journaling, you get a journal, you write it down and things like that. That sounds cool. But to make it work for you, if it's something that you have to do on the go, if a thought comes in your mind, or like something that you want to work on pops up, I always bring out your phone. It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be a regular notebook where you're
Right.
sitting down and then like you're in a comfy chair. It could be while you're on the train on your way to work and you have that time to like have time to yourself. use that time in the morning to really reflect.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's while you're on the go, then do it, write it down. It could be, I always say, use in your phone, the note section in your phone. And that could be your way to journal. So even with my personal experience, I've used that with journaling. And I think journaling is good because it allows people to reflect. Um, and I always say with therapy, a lot of the times, like I have this with my clients where, you know, you have to give yourself grace. Like a lot of people are very hard on themselves. And like I said, working to try to just fix yourself. But it's
Mm-hmm.
a day by day progress. Journaling allows you to look back and say, oh, wow, like this time last month, like I was like not doing this and I had this unhealthy behavior. And then this month, like, this is not the situation. Like I'm progressing. I have healthier communication. Like I'm getting along with my children better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think journaling helps you to reflect, to think of those good times because you are going to have hard times.
Right.
So when those hard times come and you feel disappointed, you can always reflect back in the journal, whether it's a book, whether it's your phone, looking back and really like, being proud of yourself and how far you've come to then push yourself to get motivated to continue to progressing. So
Gotcha.
I think journaling is very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. And being hard on yourself is something that I struggle with a lot. And you actually gave me feedback on. We talked one day on the phone after work, and you're like, give yourself some grace. And that perfectionism, I mean, I talked about that in my previous episode, stemming from childhood trauma, like feeling the need to be perfect. But obviously, having you as a sister, I tapped into you as a resource, and you let me know, like, hey, Tyron, it's not about being perfect. And so, are there any other techniques that you find to be very helpful when it comes to just anything that you find to be very therapeutic, or because I have some other ones that I have here, but you being a licensed individual, I'm not sure if there's anything up your sleeve that you haven't brought up yet that would be useful for our audience here.
No, I agree. So I would say journaling is a good technique to do. And as far as reflection, meditation is another good thing. I think positive words of affirmation, just
Mhm.
even if it's and I think meditation is actually hard because staying still, we're just always in the rut of like I have to keep going, I have to keep going, especially being in New York. Like, you're always gonna go. Me, I have like I wake up, there's like a million things on my to-do list. And then I
Mhm.
also have to give back to clients throughout the day. So
Mhm.
my whole thing is like, okay, what can I do for myself? So even meditation is helpful, but you have to be in the right mind space to do it. Some things I find on YouTube, white noise, that you can put on in the background,
Mhm.
even if it's for 5 minutes, and just be one with yourself. The biggest thing is like a lot of grounding techniques, focusing on your breathing. And that's the thing. A lot of the times, like we get, throughout the day, we may seem that we're getting overwhelmed and stressed with a lot of things. I think grounding yourself to be present,
Mhm.
and I think that's what a lot of the anxiety comes from with individuals is like the future self, the future thoughts, the future worries. So
Mhm.
being present with ourselves, and then we always focus on the past. So
Mhm.
being present is very challenging for people. So a lot of breathing techniques, grounding. I always say, think of your five senses. What are you smelling that is very calming to you? What do you like to listen to that's very calming or makes you have like laugh? Something that you're watching. Some people, like to watch YouTube videos or comedies, like things that are really funny. And thinking of all those five senses, touching. Touching is something very big. Like, is there something that you like to touch? I know people with the smell, they like lavender. Lavender is very cooling. So I think having those five senses, think about it, grounding yourself and just closing your eyes and having that, even if it's 5 minutes with yourself, to get yourself like in a happy place where you know that you can always go back to that place whenever you're feeling very overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Counting, I always say breathing and counting and just using your body. Like your body is, I think, very powerful. It has a lot of these senses that we feel. Tensing up your body, every now and then, like every part of your body, tensing your eyes, your shoulders, tensing them up for like 12 seconds and then releasing. Because we tend to hold a lot of things in our shoulder, a lot of things throughout our body. So focus on every single body part, tensing it up and just releasing and focusing on that. And I feel like those are good grounding techniques to help people reset.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And funny enough, the next thing that was on my list was meditation. So, and a lot of those techniques. So thank you for mentioning that. That was very helpful.
Mhm,
There's one final one before we get ready to wrap up here that I like to mention, and that is faith. And I know that's something that probably your clients, that you encounter, that faith is important to them. And that's something like I'm getting, baptized on August 20th, and I'm looking forward to it. And me reading the Bible, I never thought how calming it could be, but there's a lot of advice I find there and a lot of useful information, and it causes me to be in a calm state. So
mhm.
can you, if before we get out of here, somebody who, like myself, does believe in God, can you tell me where faith can help in terms of like a therapeutic method for
Yeah, no,
those
it's
experiences?
funny that you say that. I think working with the geriatric population, they bring up faith a lot, and that experience doing therapy with the geriatric population was very rewarding, only because like I'm talking with individuals who are seeing so many facets and transition of life.
Gotcha.
These are older adults, childhood stuff and things that, when you hear their stories, like a lot of the stuff with, protective services and things in place in therapy, these things were not popular, common, and talked about. Everything was like, keep it in the family, don't say anything.
Hmm.
And you're going through life dealing with all of those things. So a lot of them do have a big sense of faith.
Hmm.
And specifically believing in God and different religions. I do feel more with like more millennials, like not everyone believes specifically in God or just one figure, but a
Right.
lot of people have a lot of spirituality. So if
Yeah.
spirituality is your thing, go for it, like there's
Hmm.
no judgment there. Like whatever can allow you to see that there's something other than you and bigger than you.
Gotcha.
To say that, I have a purpose here. Because sometimes
Yes.
it is hard to see it like in our day-to-day lives, within our family, our relationships. This may be feeling, but having that faith can really like bring you back to say like, I'm living for something more. There's something better out there for me.
Hmm.
And I think faith also gives you reason to look forward to a new day, to be rebirthed. Like, it's something new. So I think that also can keep people going. Like dealing with the geriatric population, you're going to do through death, of siblings that you were close with, relationships. So all those safety nets are kind of falling at the wayside. And a
Hmm.
lot of the times people do hold on to faith or spirituality. So I think that, whatever you can do to find healthy coping mechanisms where you have a community and you have faith, I think that's important.
Perfect. And if you had any last words for our audience as we get ready to wrap up our episode when it comes to childhood trauma, trials, and tribulations and addressing it and moving through it, what is, a quick last words of advice or
Mhm.
just input that you have for our audience here today, Kerry?
Well, I will say childhood trauma, um, don't let that control your narrative. I think a lot of the times in therapy, it is becoming more popular, and I do appreciate it that people are talking about mental health. But I think sometimes, because of that, people use that as a crutch,
Mm.
and like to use that as like, this is who I am. It's
Hmm.
a part of you. So I don't want people to take like the childhood trauma. It's real. It happens, and that was your experience, and it's not to invalidate it, but you need to validate it, find ways to, be a healthier person with that. Know that you are going to have setbacks, have grace with yourself, but know that that's just one facet of your life. Like there's other layers to individuals outside of their trauma. So I'm really big on people like finding that. Like you can create that new sense of self, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that is the biggest point, and that's something I want to share. Just being a therapist and hearing a lot of people's stories, like don't get stuck in that trauma and that narrative. You are so much bigger than that.
Perfect. Thank you. And I really appreciate you, Kerry. Thank you for joining us today. And actually, I have a last few words that I want you and the rest of the audience to hear based off what you said. And that is acknowledge the trauma in your childhood, but don't let it be your life story. We all
Mhm.
must take accountability of our lives so that we don't go through life and relationship blaming others for our past and our present problems. If you do, that's then in that case you'll be a fraud and helpless because you are putting your life's outcome in someone else's hands when it should be in yours. This is not to disregard the intense work that will be required in a tough process you have to endure, but it ensures you continue on the path of success. Go to therapy and do the self-work now so that you don't cause others to have to do it on your behalf, as they may be casualties to your lack of initiative. To put it short, the world is not responsible for your brokenness and insecurities that stem from your past, especially as a child where you usually had no or limited power. So you can't expect the world to fix it. And it's not the reality that it has to be for you. And there's an opportunity to change that for yourself and to live a better life if you choose to confront these things as opposed to sweeping them under the rug. Do the work now so that you don't become a perpetrator of trauma because you did not choose to address it on your own. And most importantly, give yourself grace. So thank you for that, Kerry. And for our audience today, as usual, stay focused, be humble, love yourself, and stay strong in America.